On this episode of the AAF Exchange, Congress returns to face a federal funding showdown, the Fed cautions against declaring a soft landing victory, and the Biden administration announces the first round of drugs subject to Medicare's price negotiation. Joining us to discuss all of this is Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Doug, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure as usual.
Yep, so August is winding down. We're getting ready for...
It's gone.
Yes,
Kyle,
true.
gone.
It's gone. It's gone. I meant to say the summer is winding down, but I think I just got August stuck in my head for some reason. So anyways, Congress is coming back in. I'm sure there's a lot to talk about with all that. We'll get to that later. But what's on your mind right now?
X or Twitter or whatever we're calling it now. Okay, I just had it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm tweeting or Xing.
Yeah.
I don't know how to refer to it.
Yeah.
It's. I find this all terribly frustrating.
Retweeting, reposting. We're just changing all the names up. So I don't know.
Reacts. I can't react. No one reacts in public. No. So yeah, I'm a little upset about that.
Right.
And then when I do X, what I find out is the Biden administration is claiming that it's taking care of the deficit, and now I'm just furious because the reality is the deficit has doubled through the first 10 months of the fiscal year. When asked about it, the various people say things like, well, the president has proposed $3 trillion of budget deficit reduction in his budget. That's not doing something. That's talking. And so, they've got a terrible track record on this, and it's an economy that's at full employment. It shouldn't have a $1 trillion plus deficit. I mean, it's just really an embarrassment, and there's no seriousness about taking it on.
Yeah, I mean, this is that claim that they continuously repeat on, about his record on fiscal responsibility and fiscal sobriety, that he's cut the deficit because of certain legislations he's only looking at, but not looking at the full picture.
I mean, the reality is this. In April of 2020, we lost, 20 million jobs in a month. The unemployment rate went up by 10 percentage points. The economy cratered to a degree that was simply unprecedented, and it rebounded. And he arrived in the middle of that rebound and takes credit for the jobs that came with the rebound, the deficit reduction that comes with the rebound, and he didn't do anything for that. And that's the reality.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that's like you said, it just happened because he was there, not because he did anything particular. All right, well, as we mentioned before, Congress is back in town. Yes. Hooray. It faces a daunting September to-do list. I mean, it's quite extensive. And, they don't have a lot of time to get a lot of this stuff done. And the big item on this is obviously funding the federal government. I think it's till the end of the month, September 30th, to get that done before the clock runs out. Would you remind us, where Congress stands on this front, and what are some of those other to-do items beyond that?
Well, on the funding the government front, what we should have is 12 appropriation bills passed by the House, another 12 by the Senate, conference agreements signed into law. We're nowhere close to that. House hasn't passed any. Senate has passed a whole bunch, but they don't even come close to where the House is saying they're going to be. And so we're relitigating the same fight we had around the debt ceiling, which is House Republicans wanting to roll back the spending levels to fiscal 21 levels, and the agreement was to go back to fiscal 22 levels, and the Senate's doing 22 and the House doing 21, and they're worlds apart. So how do you bridge that divide? Well, not easily is the short answer. There has to be some sort of temporary funding and continuing resolution, but there have been some in the House who've sworn they will not pass a continuing resolution. So, the public statements indicate a complete impasse, but, the next step, as near as I can tell, will be next week the Senate will take up what they are calling a minibus, which is several of their Senate-passed appropriations bills packaged into a single bill with a CR, pass that, send it over to the House, and see what they do. And so stay tuned. It's going to be, I think, difficult at best. We're going to have a variety of stopgap measures between now and the end of the year until they finally get this all sorted out.
What about some of those other issues? The NDAA is still out there.
Oh, they have so much work to do. They have the NDAA, they have the FAA reauthorization, they have a farm bill they have to do, a National Flood Insurance Program, my personal favorite, going to expire on September 30th. And we're in hurricane season. And so, these things really are things they have to get done, and how are they going to? The usual approach is tack them onto the must-pass piece of continuing resolution legislation, but if that's not must-pass in the eyes of House Republicans, it might not happen.
Yeah, I mean, you wrote an interesting dish a couple of days ago about your favorite topic, the flood insurance program, saying that, they do tack on these short-term extensions, but, it's really not great for the program itself to continue doing that. I mean, is there any hope that they could get a longer-term solutions on some of these broader measures?
It's been a decade since anyone was serious about reauthorizing the flood insurance program and modernizing the flood maps so that we know what is genuinely at risk for flooding. And with both coastal sea level rise and with weather patterns, those aren't the same as they used to be, and pricing them appropriately. It's a radically underpriced program. I thought this administration would take the hardline economist view of the universe, which is say, okay, let's say we have an increased risk of a flood here. We have to charge a higher premium for flood insurance there. That will keep people from building in environmentally sensitive places, and that would be a good outcome from their perspective. But they haven't used the tool that they have available. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, this administration really seems like they care. I mean, one of their two big things you always hear them talk about is the climate-related issues that they're trying to tackle, and it doesn't seem like they're.
One of the best things you can do to mitigate the impact of climate change, to adapt, is to price insurance appropriately so that people have market incentives to avoid exposing themselves to whatever climate changes we're experiencing.
Interesting. I mean, so, we like to talk about the economy a lot on this podcast. And so assume for a second they don't get a deal on funding the government, the big ticket item here. How could a shutdown impact the economy?
In the big picture, it's not a huge headwind. The reality is that about 2/3 of federal workers are exempt from the shutdown. They continue to go to work. They don't get paid until we get funding. Then they get their back pay and they're made whole. So they continue sending out the Social Security checks. They continue doing essential functions of government, and everyone's been labeled essential now. And we shut down the visible things like the Washington Monument and the parks, and those don't happen. So there isn't a big interruption from that point of view. But there are some real nuisances out there, that's for sure. If you don't have your flood insurance, you can't close on your home. And the National Flood Insurance Program can continue to service existing policies, and it can take care of servicing claims. It has money, but it can't write new policies. And so if you want to close on your home and you need to have flood insurance, you can't do it if the government's shut. So that's not a big, it's going to cause a lot of unemployment, but it causes a lot of complaining to the congressman, and that's the kind of thing that generates the momentum to get a deal and open it back up.
That's what'll move needles, yeah. That makes sense. So speaking of the economy, many have begun predicting this week that the Fed the Fed could pull off this so-called soft landing that we heard a lot about in the beginning, sort of went by the wayside in the talking points as we continued on. But to his credit, in Jackson Hole, he had that great speech where, Fed Chair Jay Powell, warned that there's still a long way to go. So what do you think? Is it premature? It's football week to spike the football?
Absolutely premature. The feeling was that, when we were back at 9, that getting from 9 to 4 isn't that hard. Getting from 4 to 2 is. This is the real work. This is the hard part. And the truth is, the U.S. has caught 3 big breaks on the inflation front. Break number 1 is China. China is suffering absolute deflation, and we're importing that into the United States, which gives us less price pressure in the U.S. So import prices haven't risen in nearly a year. They're declining every month. So that's a huge supply side break. The cost of inputs are not what they used to be. Energy costs have come down dramatically, and that's been the source of this big decline in the headline inflation rate. And the third, which we just learned this morning, is productivity growth was quite strong in the second quarter. And now year-over-year productivity growth has broken into positive territory for the first time since last quarter of 2021. So, if you're getting supply side breaks, you don't have to hammer demand as much. You don't have to bring down employment as much. You don't have to do a lot of things the Fed thought they might have to do. And so it looks like the soft landing's here, right? Mm-hmm. Unless those go away.
Right.
And the energy price thing probably will go away. China, hard to say. That really a mess right now. And productivity growth is quite erratic. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, off air, I think a couple of days ago we were talking about the Cleveland Fed tracker that shows that things might not be as rosy.
If you look at the Cleveland Fed's nowcast for CPI inflation, that takes whatever you learned during the course of the month and tries to forecast that month's CPI inflation rate. They're at 0.8% for August on the top line CPI. That's basically gas prices going back up, energy prices going with it. So that's an over 9% annual rate. That'll wake people up. The core is at 0.4, so you're up there at nearly 5% on the core. That's just an unwinding of the good luck we've had.
Mm-hmm. So probably a mild mannered meeting in September, but November we could see some interesting.
Yes, I mean that's really ammunition for the inflation hawks, and the debate is now not over whether we will continue to tighten. They will. The questions will be passive. You just keep rates where they are. You let inflation come down. The real interest rate's going up the whole time. The portfolio is shrinking. That's sort of a passive. Or do you actually do another rate hike and aggressively tighten? That's going to be a big debate.
Interesting. Well, as always, we'll wait and see, and I'm sure we'll be back talking about it for the rest of the year, more than likely. But let's do some trivia. I think it's time for some trivia.
Didn't feel like that, but anyway.
I tried to make it easy this week, but Angela, when she was going through and editing, said this was the one I had was too easy, so she had to make it a little on the harder side for you.
Listeners,
so I'm
launching a protest.
Blame Angela on this one. All right, I think you'll still get it. I think it's right up your alley. We were talking about it, budgets and things like that. So in 2002, Medicare spent $905 billion on medical services, but only collected X amount in payroll taxes and monthly premiums. Fill in the blank. What is X?
In 2002?
In 2002. I'll give you a hint. It's lower.
Oh, yeah. No, it was contributing a lot to the deficit. We had big deficits back then. So I'd say they probably collected about $700 billion.
Yeah, it's even less.
Ooh.
$501 billion.
Ooh. So that's a $400 billion on Medicare alone. The peak budget deficit back then was $427 billion, which I got all the blame for. It was just simply not fair. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a good fun fact.
Wait. You're saying 2002, not when you were there. It's 2022. So this was last year's budget deficit.
Well, you completely misled me.
No, I said 22. I think I will have to roll the tape back, but I could have said it too quick. But yes, anyway, this was last year's.
Got it, 500. That sounds right.
Yeah. So but that's still a large number.
Huge chunk. Yes.
So but it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the federal deficit and federal debt just continuing to grow and grow.
Absolutely. And at the heart of that is the entitlement programs. Social Security, Medicare really are screaming for reforms to, as I've said many times, for the beneficiaries, if no one else, because those programs are not going to survive financially in their current form. Mm-hmm. Got to fix them.
Yeah. So, you were talking about a little bit. So, going back to 2002, when what you thought the question was, I'll admit that. Is that kind of a deficit between how much they spend and how much they take in? Is that normal, or is that way out of whack?
Yeah. This is how Medicare is responsible for 1/3 of all federal debt outstanding. It's because the program was not designed to be financially sustainable. Parts B, C, and D, so that's outpatient care, Medicare Advantage, and the drug program, are premium financed, and the premiums were designed to cover 1/4 of the cost of the program. The other 3/4 are coming from the Treasury. So it's designed to bleed red ink.
Interesting. All right, let's stay on healthcare and finish up with last week, the Biden administration announced the first 10 prescription drugs that would be subject to price negotiation with Medicare under the Inflation Reduction Act. So first, what does this mean for drugs to be subject to this price negotiation?
So HHS taps you on the shoulder, says you're up, and you are eligible for this if you're in the top 50 total spending for Part D, and these are all in that category. And then right away, you are asked, do you want to be in negotiation? And if you say no, you get the famous 95% tax, which is a tax on the price including the tax. So if you look at the tax as a fraction of just what the producer gets, it's a 1,900% tax. So that you have no choice. You're in. And then by law, we set the price at 40 to 70% of the average manufacturing price outside of the federal government. That depends on how long the drug's been on the market. And then we negotiate further. So it's not a real negotiation. It's the Secretary of HHS naming a price for all practical purposes.
Yeah, so it's basically take our price or take a hike.
Yeah. And, the drugs will... My question is, at some point, will a drug maker call their bluff and just pull it all off the market?
Yeah, because then that would be an interesting scenario to see play out. It would. And does the administration really willing to go that far to allow them to pull it off the market? Why these 10 drugs? They're
big spending, and so they were on that list. B, they seem to try to get different kinds of drugs. So, for example, they got Xarelto and Eliquis, they're blood thinners. Mm-hmm. That seems weird to me because neither of those is without competition. They compete with each other vigorously. B, they aren't that expensive. These aren't the poster child for the $100,000 treatment drug. These are things that cost hundreds of dollars for beneficiaries. Excuse me. And then there's the real chance that because of the nature of the competition, which is giving rebates to try to get a preferred placement on the formularies, preferred placement usually means no copay, that if they cut the price, they're going to stop that. They're not going to do rebates. They'll end up on a tier in the formulary where the beneficiary has a copay, and the act of doing the negotiation will actually raise the out-of-pocket cost to the beneficiary. That would be a perverse result that is not the intention of the program. That's because they went after drugs that aren't the poster child problem. And then they seem to go after to make sure they got an insulin as well. So they bundled together for drug number 10 two different kinds of insulins because they're the same delivery mechanism. It doesn't look like that's consistent with the statute, but they did it. And so they seem to have both some policy goals and some budgetary goals in picking them.
Interesting. Yeah. And then so you kind of talked about this earlier. I mean, again, but it's worth, I think, reiterating is you've been critical of calling this the negotiation because of those provisions that basically say take our price or walk home. For a long time, the CBO had, beginning with me as the director when the drug program passed, has concluded that giving the secretary the power to negotiate, genuinely negotiate, would not really affect drug prices very much. And the reason is the secretary doesn't have anything to offer to get in exchange for a lower price. What a typical drug plan does is they go to the manufacturer and say, I've got a couple million members, and I can give you the preferred tier. And I won't use that other drug from your competitor. So here we go. They get a better price. The Secretary of HHS doesn't have a formulary. They're never going to say, our seniors can't get this drug. We're going to pick this one and not that one. So that's gone. They don't have any more beneficiaries than the plans have. The plans have the beneficiaries. The Secretary of HHS doesn't have anything with which to genuinely negotiate. So what they did is they gave them, something to, quote, negotiate with, and that's a ruinous tax. And so giving the secretary the actual power to negotiate is just a budgetary non-starter. That's the problem. So I mean, there was an interesting report in, I think it was the Wall Street Journal this morning about how inflation in healthcare is going up, and it could we could see a higher premiums because of that over the next year. Would this contribute to that problem, or is there some?
So drugs have never been the main reason for healthcare cost inflation.
Yeah.
The vast majority of American healthcare spending is in hospitals and on docs, and that's where the real inflation problem is. Drugs are always the poster child, but they are quantitatively the important problem.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I think there was some part of the report where it's talking about some of those longer-term drugs, but doesn't seem like like you were saying, it's mostly the emergency room and doctor issues.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I'm sure we'll be continuing to talk about this.
Yes.
Because as we know, healthcare is going with the campaign around the corner. I have to imagine healthcare will come up a few times.
Yes, never goes away. That's for sure.
In the short term, though, who you got this weekend? Anybody? Football season's back. You must be as excited as I am.
The Steelers have dramatically upgraded their team. I think that's fair to say. They're in a horrifically difficult division. Everyone in there is real good, so I'm not going to declare them odds-on favorites to win the division or go to the Super Bowl, but they're going to be competitive every week this year. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. You get your rant at the beginning of every podcast, and I never get to do one, but this time I'm going to say the Patriots are going to have a better record than the Steelers, and I'm tired of all these sports reporters trashing the Patriots. So I'm going. I'll be in a much different spot 8 weeks from now, but
it'll be fine. We'll let the sports reporters stop trashing them. I'll take care of it myself.
Perfect. I can't wait. Looking forward to it. Well, thanks again, Doug, for joining us.
My pleasure.